Welcome to Kevin Deal Photography, where I take you on my journey through photography. On today's episode, we're going to be doing an in-depth review of the limited edition AF35mm 1.8 from TT Artisan. Welcome to today's episode. If you're not familiar with Kevin Deal Photography, we do gear reviews, tips, techniques, and tutorials, and sometimes we dive into film. If any of that sounds appealing to you, click the subscribe button below. For all of you who are back to Kevin Deal Photography, welcome back. And for all you where this is your first time here, at the beginning of every episode, I ask for donations to BIG, which is an organization that helps intellectually disabled adults adapt to jobs in the real world. But to the subject of today's episode, not quite sure what to make of this. TT Artisan reached out to me recently and asked me if I would do a review of their new limited edition 35mm f1.8. Now, I did do a review of the original 35 1.8. They had a version 1, and then they came out with a second generation, which they released in both black and silver. But I actually missed out on the second generation review, and since they offered me the second generation in the form of this red and yellow aesthetic, I said, why not? So we all need to determine, as an audience, what should we call this color scheme? Should we call it Hulk Hogan, Ronald McDonald, Kodak, or Winnie the Pooh? Tell me in the comments below. This is definitely a bold design choice, and this is clearly marketed towards somebody who wants everybody to know that they have a camera because your eye goes right to it. But that's just the aesthetics. How are the optics? How well built is it? We're going to find all that out in today's episode. I'm going to take this guy out on the streets. We're going to shoot some street photography here in Texas. I'm going to do a portrait session. We're going to do real world tests as we do on this channel. And while I appreciate TT Artisan giving me this copy for evaluation, like all my reviews, it's going to be completely independent. I'm going to tell you what I like. I'm going to tell you what I don't like. But before we do all of that, let's talk about the specs. The TT Artisan AF35mm f1.8 limited edition is a lens made for APS-C camera systems. It has a 52.5mm perspective and full frame, which is about what we see with our eyes. Its aperture range is f1.8 to f16. Its angle of view is 45 degrees. Its minimum focusing distance is 15.7 inches or 0.4 meters. Its optical design is 10 elements in 7 groups, and it has 9 rounded aperture blades. Its front filter thread size is 52 millimeters. This lens is not weather sealed or image stabilized. Its dimensions are 2.55 by 1.92 inches or 65 by 49 millimeters. It comes in at a weight of 6.8 ounces or 193 grams, and it comes in at a street price of $140 US. All right, so those are some pretty impressive specs. None of that matters, though, until we go test it out in the real world. That's how we do things on this channel. So let's take this guy out into the field right now. All right, so I'm here in the Alamo City, and I'm gonna test out this 35 1.8. I did a little bit of shooting when I was up in Waco. Did a pretty good job. I'm gonna take some moments to test it out against this 35 1.7 from Viltrox. They're similarly priced and pretty close in terms of maximum aperture. So let's see what kind of shots we can get with this 35 1.8 in the Alamo City. And of course, I'll compare with this Viltrox where I feel it's necessary.
All right, that was fun. Let's take a look at some files. Okay, we're gonna do a very quick overview of the optical quality of this TT Artisan 35 1.8. I'll do a comparison with the Viltrox Air 1.7. So real quick, look at this vignetting. This is 1.8, f2, 2.8, f4. I would say that vignetting clears up between f4 and f5.6. Definitely something to note. That is a pretty heavy vignette. Moving on, I would say the bokeh at 1.8, right around the minimum focusing distance, is fairly smooth. Definitely impressive for a $140 lens. For that flaring, I didn't really get a lot of crazy flaring out of this lens, which is definitely a compliment. You may say that that's bad, but man, this is 140 bucks. I've had lenses 4 or 5 times more expensive than this one do worse than this, so can you really say that's that bad? I don't think so. Look how sharp that is at f7.1. When you get to the corners though, tiny bit softer. Not quite sure this actually ends up resolving perfectly in the corners when it's stopped down. Now let's do a comparison between the TT Artisan and the Viltrox. The one on top is the TT Artisan, as you can see right here from the metadata. And the one on the bottom is the Viltrox. Now, something that stands out to me right off the bat is the Viltrox hues a little bit orange. I also think the Viltrox might be a little bit tighter. When you look right here, this is the sign for the Crockett Hotel. So Crockett, C-R-O-C-K-E-T-T. The K, E, and the T are on this TT Artisan file, and they are chopped off. They are cropped out of the Viltrox file. Just let that be a lesson that when a manufacturer gives you a spec, that is an approximation. If a lens says it's 35 millimeters, it may be a little longer, it may be a little wider. When I zoom in on the Alamo, of course, when you're in San Antonio, you got to take a picture of the Alamo. I will say that the micro contrast here in the center of the frame on the Viltrox is superior, in my opinion, to the micro contrast of the TT Artisan. The Viltrox is $50 more. Do keep that in mind. We're here at 100%. Center of the frame, I think that this is definitely punchier. Moving to the outside, stop down to 7.1. I would say that the Viltrox is a little bit better. So something to keep in mind there. Now let's do a comparison of Davy Crockett. So here are both the lenses at their maximum aperture. This is the 1.8 on top and the 1.7 Viltrox on the bottom. And once again, you can see that this feels a little tighter, just slightly tighter. Now, I wasn't perfect here because I wasn't using a tripod. The stock of his gun is a little more in this shot and it's truncated on this one, but that's just because I moved to the right. Looking at the center of the frame, I will say that this TT Artisan is pretty solid, and so is the Viltrox. Now, when we move to f2, I think right away I can see that this Viltrox is a tiny bit sharper. On the outside of the frame, the Viltrox is also sharper. Now, let's go to f4. Viltrox is even sharper, but at f4, I think the vignetting definitely clears up on that TT Artisan, or starts to clear up, and it's very sharp at this point. If we go to 5.6, definitely pretty solid at this point. Wow, that Viltrox does perform very well, but once again, it has that slightly orange tint, which is kind of interesting. I feel like maybe the TT Artisan is a little bit more neutral. Just for one more example, as I zoom in, this right here demonstrates quite a bit. Now, I don't really feel like you can learn a lot zooming in past 100%, but one thing you can learn about is how well these lenses resolve. Look at how sharp this is at 400%. That's the Viltrox. Look at how sharp this is not at 400%. That's the TT Artisan. What that tells me is that the TT Artisan does not resolve as well on a 40 megapixel sensor, which is what my X-H2 has, and the Viltrox resolves very well on a 40 megapixel sensor. Additionally, I shot these wide open intentionally to try to recreate hues and chromatic aberrations, which definitely rear their ugly heads here on the TT Artisan. They're absolutely more controlled on the Viltrox. So now you can see what the $50 difference gets you between the TT Artisan and the Viltrox. Let's go back to my studio and let's talk about what I liked and didn't like about the TT Artisan f1.8 limited edition.
All right, so I used this guy out in the field. We did some file comparisons between this TT Artisan and the Viltrox Air. I've also just reviewed quite a few budget-friendly lenses on this channel, especially for the Fuji X mount. So I have a pretty good idea of how to feel about this limited edition TT Artisan f1.8. So we're going to talk about the pros and the cons, and let's talk about a few things that could be considered cons. First, for the Fuji purists out there, there is no aperture ring. A 35mm lens naturally lends itself to street photography, and many street photographers love an aperture ring. Unfortunately, this doesn't have one. Now, is that a fair criticism for a $140 autofocus lens? With prices climbing across the industry, calling the lack of an aperture ring a con at this price point might be a stretch, but for some of you, it could also be a deal breaker. If that's the case, this probably isn't the lens for you. Next, the aesthetic. This limited edition has a bold, almost cartoonish look. It does not lend itself well to discretion. If you're buying a 35mm for street photography, you probably don't want to attract attention, and this lens will attract attention, maybe even attention you don't want. The color scheme doesn't match anything Fuji makes. So if you're considering this lens for street work, or if the look just doesn't vibe with you, I'd recommend checking out the black or silver versions instead. They're the same lens, slightly cheaper, and they blend much better with Fuji bodies. Another con of this lens is that you have to do firmware updates to the rear lens cap. I guess that's not a big deal if you know the whereabouts of your rear lens cap, but if you lose your rear lens cap, you lose the ability to upgrade the firmware on this lens. I've always been outspoken against TT Artisan for doing this. I would rather have the USB-C port in the lens mount like all their competitors. Now let's talk about image quality cons. Even stopped down, the extreme corners never became incredibly sharp. At f1.8, the vignetting is fairly strong, and on higher megapixel bodies, the lens doesn't resolve quite as well. It seems better suited for cameras in the 24 to 26 megapixel range. On my X-H2, files looked a little soft when zoomed in closely compared to the more expensive Viltrox Air. And that's really it for my criticisms of this limited edition 35 1.8. Now, let's talk about what this lens gets right. The build quality is solid. Compared to the first generation version, which I own, this second generation feels noticeably more premium. It inspires more confidence in the hand and out in the field. It's also slightly smaller than the original. That's definitely a win. Most people shooting on APS-C do so because they want a compact setup, and this lens fits that philosophy perfectly.
Now, I did say that I did not like the placement of the USB-C port on the rear lens cap, but for the price, the fact that you can even do USB-C firmware upgrades at all is definitely a pro. Additionally, TT Artisan gives you a matching front lens hood. The fact that you get all of this in a $140 lens is absolutely a pro.
As for the aesthetic, while I personally don't prioritize how my gear looks, some of you do. Fuji users often care about the visual identity of their setup just as much as performance. If you like bold, unique gear, this lens delivers that. When I was testing it, a friend immediately walked over and started asking me about it. It's a conversation starter for sure. For some of you, that might be considered a pro. Now, let's get into the image quality positives. While the extreme corners never became razor sharp, they did improve when stopped down, and the center sharpness is genuinely very good. For a $140 lens, many of you may find that more than acceptable. Color reproduction was neutral. I didn't notice any strange color casts. The minimum focusing distance is very usable, and the flare control, especially at this price point, was pretty impressive. I didn't see excessive contrast loss or distracting ghosting in backlit situations. Autofocus was snappy and accurate. I didn't hear any noticeable noise unless I put my ear right next to the lens. For a $140 autofocus lens, that's a pretty strong performance. And finally, value. You're getting a autofocus lens with a maximum aperture of f1.8. You're getting a compact size, you're getting solid build quality, and if you like it, you're getting unique styling. All for $140. And if you skip the limited edition color, the black or silver versions drop to around $125, which makes it an even better value. Yes, lenses like the Viltrox Air offer better optical performance, but they also cost more. For many of you, that extra $50 matters. So, should you buy this lens? That depends on who it's for. If you're a street photographer who values discretion, the limited edition version probably isn't the move. Go black or silver. If you're someone who enjoys bold gear, likes standing out, and wants something visually unique in your kit, this might be right up your alley. I personally don't shoot for aesthetics, but some of you absolutely do, and that's okay. So, what did you think of my review of the limited edition TT Artisan 35mm f1.8? Was it fair? Tell me about it in the comments below. If you're interested in picking up either this limited edition or the black and silver editions, I'll leave links in the description below. That does it for today's episode. I want to thank each and every one of you for watching today. Did you pick up the limited edition? Did you order the limited edition? Did you go in another direction? Tell me about that in the comments below. And if you're a fan of this channel, I humbly ask you to click the subscribe button below. And until next time, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.